Good afternoon. We're live from CNN Center Atlanta with the latest CNN headline news. I'm Chuck Roberts. A world-class fighting force and not one bullet more. The Pentagon today is ordering belt tightening and weapons modernization and support systems, announcing 2 base closing reviews as well as personnel cuts. Frontline forces are spared, and the major weapons programs already underway will be kept in the quadrennial defense review. Critics say the Pentagon cuts don't go far enough given these tranquil times. Commitments to defend South Korea and the Persian Gulf eat up much of the Pentagon budget and will continue to do so under this new scheme. Defense Secretary William Cohen says the new force must be ready to fight regional wars simultaneously. The uniform ranks, led by the Joint Chiefs of Staff, insisted on minimal changes in the combat force.
We can just try to replicate it.
I'm very disappointed with the QDR. It does not, in fact, get at the heart of the issue, which is a need to cut some major weapons programs. If we're not going to raise the top-line defense number, if we're not going to cut back on the deployment rate that's been the practice for the past 5 years, if we're not going to come to environmental costs, then he has to cut some programs.
The Pentagon review calls for 90,000 fewer service members and 160,000 fewer civilian workers. President Clinton, you saw him momentarily there, says the cutbacks strike a good balance, though some congressional Republicans, from whom you heard of one, promise a fight over base closing parameters. The Secretary of the Air Force is still waiting for a formal request from Lieutenant Kelly Flynn for an honorable discharge. Lawyers for the first female B-52 bomber pilot plan to submit her resignation offer today, less than 24 hours before Flynn's scheduled court-martial on adultery charges. Once the papers are submitted at Minot North Dakota Air Base, they must head up the chain of command to Air Force Secretary Sheila Widnall, who for now is refusing comment. Flynn's lawyer wants the court-martial delayed 2 weeks to give Widnall more time to consider the request.
Essentially, we're going to take the position that an honorable discharge is not that unusual and it's not unprecedented. In fact, I've defended other clients who have received honorable discharges in similar circumstances. The problem the Air Force faces right now is they elected to put this in a court-martial forum, and that sort of locks them into a difficult position in how to resolve it.
Flynn says if her request is denied, she will fight these charges in court. An FBI chemist defended the handling of evidence today at the trial of Oklahoma City bombing defendant Timothy McVeigh in Denver. McVeigh's lawyers are trying to suggest that key pieces of evidence were mishandled. FBI chemist Ron Kelly says technicians didn't test a piece of the Ryder truck found at the bombing scene because they didn't run risk contamination. The truck is believed to have carried the bomb that blew up the AP Murrah Federal Building in April 1995. Also today, prosecutors introduced into evidence earplugs allegedly taken from McVeigh when he was arrested. They contend he used the plugs to protect his ears during the blast. President Clinton says democratic and economic reform in China is best served by a policy of constructive engagement. He announced today he'll renew China's most favored nation trade status for another year. This allows China to export goods to the U.S. under the lowest possible tariffs. The move is controversial, among other things, because of allegations of Chinese human rights abuses and allegations China has funneled money to U.S. political campaigns. Mr. Clinton says there's a lot to consider.
The United States has a huge stake in the continued emergence of China in a way that is open economically and stable politically. Of course, we hope it will come to respect human rights more and the rule of law more, and that China will work with us to secure an international order that is lawful and decent.
Ousted Zairian President Mobutu Sese Seko is in the West African country of Togo today. He fled his jungle palace in northern Zaire over the weekend. CNN has learned he hopes to make his way to France after the country's elections. Meanwhile, aides to Zairian leader Laurent Kabila are calling for patience in setting up democratic elections. Peter Arnett is in Kinshasa.
On a Monday morning, workers return to their jobs following a weekend revolution. Government employees lined up outside the gates of the Information Ministry in Kinshasa as rebel soldiers checked their IDs. Most were allowed to return to work, their new bosses arriving as well to take up power. It was clear the new alliance government wants the transition to be as smooth as possible. But they say there will be one major change looming on the horizon: democracy.
The alliance commits itself to set the conditions for free and fair elections open to everybody.
The people of Kinshasa have welcomed the rebel soldiers with palm fronds and open arms, calling them their liberators. But they have been making it clear that they want the revolution to lead to democracy and a new way of life. However, the new alliance spokesman was not making promises that democracy would be coming anytime soon. The regime has not set a date for elections.
Before elections, you need preparations. First, you have to have a civic spirit.
Taking Kinshasa with hardly a fight may have been the easy part for the alliance rebels. The tough job may be coping with a country that has devastated infrastructure, banks that have been closed for months, and millions of citizens barely able to earn enough each day to eat. The new officials say the priority will be the essentials.
We don't need air conditioning. What we do need is technology that is in sync with our country.
The arrival of the new regime has released pent-up frustration in a potentially volatile population.
And it's raised expectations that the new regime must contend with, and quickly, if it's to retain the enthusiastic support of the people. Peter Arnett, CNN, Kinshasa.
The U.S. Supreme Court will decide if lie detector tests should be allowed as evidence. Today, the justices agreed to review a California case in which the nation's highest military court ruled a ban on polygraphs is an unconstitutional violation of a defendant's rights. The Armed Forces Appeals Court declared favorable polygraph results should be considered on a case-by-case basis to determine whether they should be allowed for the defense. The Justice Department supports a ban on lie detector tests. The government hopes to crack down on money laundering by drug traffickers by imposing stricter money transfer rules. Treasury Department officials now will require firms to report all transfers of $750 or more outside the U.S. This, theoretically, will make it harder for drug cartels to move money out of the U.S. Currently, the only wire transfers that must be reported are those of $10,000 or more. The new rules would make nationwide what's been in effect in New York City since last summer. The American Council on Education says African Americans are closing the education gap with whites. A report shows 87% of people from both groups in their late 20s have completed high school. But a gap still exists among younger people, and the study says minorities still trail whites in higher education. 1995 statistics for people aged 25 to 29 show 26% of whites completed 4 years of college, compared with 15% of blacks, 9% of Hispanics. That group lags behind whites and African Americans in high school completion rates as well.
The high school completion rate for African Americans in 1995 was just under 77%, and for Hispanics it was just under 57%. What we continue to see for Hispanics, that is the major obstacle, is completing high school. They complete high school at a much, much lower rate than their white counterparts and their African American counterparts.
The report, by the way, finds Asian Pacific Americans are often omitted from race and education studies because they're considered a model minority who don't need attention from educators. Interior Secretary Bruce Babbitt says a reservation system could be established as soon as next year to combat congestion in U.S. national parks. In a TV interview today, he said if something isn't done soon, authorities may be forced to occasionally close parks. Yosemite in California was closed 11 times in 1995 by overcrowding. Babbitt says a mass transit system would be one way to solve the problem. Contaminated drinking water kills 900 Americans and causes illnesses in 1 million more every year. The EPA estimates it will cost almost $140 billion to clean the water supply. Gwendolyn Glenn reports.
The Chattahoochee River is one of the most endangered urban rivers in the U.S. It is also the main drinking water source for 2 million residents in metropolitan Atlanta. In the past 70 years, more drinking water sources have been abandoned in this region and anywhere else in the country due to overdevelopment of the area's watersheds.
What we see here is a reservoir that once was 30 to 50 feet deep, which has now been filled in with siltation from suburban subdivision development. That red clay is now filled in this entire lake so that it's now 2 or 3 feet deep.
A major threat to watersheds nationwide is development. Atlanta loses 30 acres of land a day to construction. Trees and vegetation, which filter water before it hits the rivers and streams, are being replaced by businesses and homes. Also, when it rains, mud from new construction can contaminate drinking water sources.
Some people have fallen in love with technology, and they felt that these problems of water quality can be cured by filtration plants and more chlorine in the water supply. And what we've learned in the Center for Disease Control confirms that there are no cheap, entirely reliable technological fixes.
Officials in Metro Atlanta are just beginning to talk collectively about watershed protection and are far behind cities such as Seattle, which owns 80% of its watersheds. When governments control the land surrounding a water supply, they can keep polluters out and save billions later on in cleanup costs. Here in Douglas County, about 20 miles west of Atlanta, officials implemented a watershed protection program in the early 1980s. That program has since been cited as highly effective by the American Water Works Association. This reservoir was built because another one closed due to pollution from construction. Officials are now using tough pollution and zoning laws to restrict watershed development.
I think we're going to see really the benefits in years to come as water regulations and water quality requirements get more stringent and more stringent. We are not going to have to make changes in our treatment process when other communities will have to.
Nationally, 1 in 5 water systems violates safety regulations. Environmentalists predict that if more emphasis is not placed on protecting watersheds, drinking water will get dirtier and water bills will go up to pay for more treatment plants. I'm Gwendolyn Glenn for CNN Atlanta.
Folks in the Northern Plains believe Joan Croc's an angel on earth. It has just come to light that Croc is the anonymous donor who gave away $15 million to help rebuild flood-ravaged cities. Croc, of course, the heiress of the McDonald's fortune. She requested officials distribute $2,000 to every family that suffered from flooding this spring. Well, we'll check the numbers on Wall Street at day's end, near the day's end, in dollars and cents, and later we'll meet the woman who's bringing new joy to a classic cookbook. Stay tuned.
A cold front will bring thunderstorms from the lower Mississippi to the northeast today. Parts of the Gulf Coast will also see some thunderstorm activity, as well as the southwest. The west coast will be dry but cooler.
This is the CNN Headline News Network.